On the morning of July 9th, 1982, a man sat down on the edge of Queen Elizabeth II's bed. He had been in the room for several minutes before she woke up. She was alone. The nearest armed guard was 4 floors away and 1 wing over, standing at a post he had not left, following a protocol he had not violated, protecting a palace he believed was secure. The man on the edge of the bed was named Michael Fagan. He was 31 years old. He was unemployed. He was wearing jeans and a checked shirt, and at some point during the night he had cut his hand on a broken ashtray he'd knocked off a shelf in an adjacent room. So when the Queen opened her eyes, she was looking at a man bleeding quietly onto her carpet while dawn came through the curtains of Buckingham Palace. He had a piece of a broken ashtray in his hand. He had crossed the palace wall, climbed the grounds, scaled a drain pipe, passed 2 armed sentries, 1 motion sensor, 1 alarmed window, and 1 footman walking a corgi at the exact wrong moment. He had walked through 3 corridors and opened 6 doors, and not one person who saw him thought anything was wrong. The kitchen knife, the one everyone would spend the next 40 years arguing about, was not with him in that room. It was in a pocket in a different room entirely. We will get to the knife. But first, understand what the knife was never asked to do, because a 31-year-old unemployed man from Islington sat on the edge of the most protected bed in Britain and was met not with a weapon, not with a trained operative, not with the full disciplined force of a security apparatus that had been refined across 3 centuries. He was met with a conversation, and then 12 minutes later, a glass of whiskey. This is the story of how that happened. Every alarm that fired and was reset by mistake. Every guard who did exactly what he was trained to do. Every door that was locked except for the one that wasn't. Every system that held until the one that didn't. And the housekeeper who won the whole thing with a question so ordinary, it should be in a training manual. Can I get you a drink, love? Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of this made you sit up straight, because there are several. The sentries on the night of July 8th, going into the 9th, were exactly what they were supposed to be. That is not a small thing to say. These were not sleeping men. These were not distracted men. These were not men who had abandoned posts or traded their vigilance for a quiet night. They were trained soldiers doing precisely the job they had been trained to do, standing precisely where they had been told to stand, watching precisely the angles they had been assigned to watch. The failure was not in them. The failure was in what they were watching for. Understand the geometry of Buckingham Palace's exterior security in 1982. The perimeter wall on the north side, the Buckingham Palace road side, stood 14 feet high. Iron railings above that. The assumption was foundational and reasonable. A man who wanted to enter the palace would come equipped to enter the palace. Tools, rope, possibly Confederates, possibly a vehicle. Certainly a plan that looked like a plan, moved like a plan, smelled like operational intent. Michael Fagan had none of those things. He had a wall, and he had been over it before. This detail, this extraordinary, almost offensively simple detail, is the thing that restructures everything that follows. July 9th, 1982 was not Michael Fagan's first visit to Buckingham Palace. He had scaled the same wall, crossed the same grounds, and entered the same building approximately 1 month earlier in late June. He had wandered through a series of rooms, drunk half a bottle of wine from the royal cellars, and left without incident, without detection, without consequence. He had done it the way a man walks into a building he has walked into before. Because he had. So on the night of July 8th, when Michael Fagan approached the palace wall on the Buckingham Palace roadside at approximately 6 a.m., the sky not yet fully light, the London summer morning sitting in that gray, uncertain period between night and dawn, he was not approaching it as a man planning a breach. He was approaching it as a man going somewhere he had already been. He went over the wall in under a minute. The sentry whose arc of visibility covered that section of the wall was walking his post. He was walking his post correctly, at the prescribed pace, covering the prescribed ground. Michael Fagan was over the wall and on the grass in the gap between two passes. Not because the sentry was negligent, because the gap existed. The grounds themselves presented the next problem for anyone who had come equipped for the problem of the grounds. Motion sensors, lighting, the geography of open lawn that gives a trained observer sightlines across a wide field. If Michael Fagan had been moving like a man trying not to be seen, low, careful, moving between shadows, any of this might have caught him. He walked across the lawn, upright at a normal pace, the way a man crosses a car park to get to the door. There is something almost philosophically destabilizing about this, and it is the thing that the subsequent inquiry would circle without ever quite landing on. The security architecture of Buckingham Palace in 1982 was designed to identify and intercept a threat that moved like a threat. It had no language for a threat that moved like a Tuesday morning. He crossed the lawn. He reached the palace's north face. The drain pipe that served the upper floors of the north wing was iron. Old iron, palace grade, the kind of infrastructure installed in an era when durability was the only specification that mattered. It was fixed to the wall with brackets set into the stone, and it ran from ground level to a point just below the roof line, passing several window ledges on the way up. Michael Fagan was not a trained climber. He was a man who had, at various points in his life, worked in construction and painting. He understood heights the way tradespeople understand heights, as something to get above, not something to be afraid of. He went up the drain pipe. At the third floor, a window was not fully latched. He opened it. He went inside. The sentry covering the north face was at the far end of his post when this happened. His post did not bring him back to that section of the wall for another 4 minutes. By the time he made that pass, there was nothing to see. A closed drain pipe, an empty lawn, the palace, gray and enormous and quiet, sitting in the early morning the way it had sat in early mornings for 300 years. He saw nothing wrong because nothing looked wrong. That is the thing. That is the whole thing. And it will keep being the thing in different configurations for the next 40 minutes. Before we follow Michael Fagan through that window, stop. Because the question that every inquiry, every commission, every security review would eventually have to answer is not how did he get in. That question has a straightforward physical answer. Wall, lawn, drain pipe, window. The answer takes 30 seconds to deliver and 40 years to stop being embarrassing. The real question is, what was the system designed to stop? Buckingham Palace's security apparatus in 1982 had been built, revised, and reinforced in response to specific historical threats. The IRA was active. The Cold War was still a war. Political violence against heads of state was not an abstraction. It was a calendar event, something that had happened and would happen again. And the question was always about readiness, response time, the gap between the moment of threat and the moment of intervention. The system was designed to stop a coordinated attack. It was designed to stop a professional. It was designed to stop a threat that announced itself as a threat, a vehicle at speed, a group of men moving with tactical purpose, an incident that broke the surface of normalcy in a way that trained observers could recognize and classify and respond to. Did you know that the yeomen of the guard, the ceremonial protectors whose Tudor uniforms and halberds make them the most photographed security presence in Britain, have been in continuous service since 1485, 500 years of visible deterrence? The logic was always the same. If the protection is visible enough, the threat will recalculate, will choose a softer target, will decide that this particular institution is not worth the attempt. Visible power as primary security doctrine. Michael Fagan was not deterred by visible power. He was not impressed by it, not calculating in response to it. not making any strategic assessment of it whatsoever. He was a man in a checked shirt who wanted to talk to the Queen. The entire architecture of deterrence, the sentries, the railings, the ceremonial weight of 3 centuries of institutional protection, was aimed at an adversary who was doing cost-benefit analysis. Michael Fagan was not doing cost-benefit analysis. He was doing something much harder to defend against. He was acting like he belonged there. And here is the gap that no inquiry would quite say out loud. The system had no protocol for a man who moved through it as though it were his own home, because the assumption threaded through every layer of that system was that such a man would not exist, that the palace would register as what it was, impenetrable, magnificent, defended to anyone who approached it. The knife was never the weapon. The invisibility was the weapon. Stay with us, because the next 20 minutes of Michael Fagan's journey through the inside of Buckingham Palace are, depending on your tolerance for bureaucratic horror, either darkly farcical or genuinely terrifying, possibly both simultaneously. Michael Fagan came through the window at approximately 6:10 in the morning. He was on the 3rd floor of the North Wing, in a corridor lined with the kind of institutional carpeting that exists in large buildings, where the corridors are not meant to be looked at functional, muted, slightly worn at the center where the feet have gone for decades. The walls held framed prints. The lighting was low. The corridor smelled of wood polish and the particular stillness of a very large building in the early morning, when the air has not yet been disturbed by the day. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned left, because left looked more promising than right, and walked down the corridor the way a man walks down a corridor in a building he is mildly curious about. The first door he opened was a storage room. He closed it. The second door was a room used for the storage of gifts and ceremonial objects, the administrative overflow of an institution that receives things it cannot display and cannot discard. He went inside. On a shelf, among other objects whose documentation would later become its own administrative headache, was a bottle of wine. He drank some of it. He put it back. He left. The 3rd corridor brought him to a staircase, and the staircase brought him up, and now he was on a floor where the carpet changed thicker, a different shade entirely, the kind of carpet that indicates you have crossed from the functional part of the building into the part of the building that matters. He registered this. He kept walking. This is the point in the narrative where the alarm enters. Somewhere on this floor, in the early architectural decision-making of the palace's security retrofit, a pressure sensor had been installed in one of the rooms. The sensor was connected to a monitoring station. At some point between 6:15 and 6:20 in the morning, as Michael Fagan moved through the corridor, the sensor registered something. It sent a signal to the monitoring station. The duty officer at the monitoring station looked at the signal. It was the kind of signal that sensors occasionally sent for reasons that had nothing to do with intruders. A shift in air pressure, a door not fully latched, the building settling in the particular way that very old stone buildings settle in the early morning. There was a protocol for this. The protocol involved checking the sensor's recent history, and if the signal appeared to be an isolated event with no corroborating triggers, categorizing it as a false alarm and resetting the system. The duty officer followed the protocol. He reset the system. Michael Fagan was 4 doors away. Now the maid. Her name was Sarah, and she was 22 years old and had been on the early shift since 5:30, working her way through the 3rd floor's public rooms with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to do it without thinking. She came around a corner and saw a man walking down the corridor toward her. He was in jeans. He had a checked shirt. His hand, she would later note, appeared to have some sort of cut on it, though in the low morning light she did not immediately register the blood. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Morning," he said. She said morning back. She thought he was a workman. The palace had ongoing maintenance work across several floors, plasterers, electricians, the kind of perpetual institutional repair that large old buildings require constantly. Men in casual clothes appearing in corridors at odd hours was not, in her experience, an alarming thing. It was a Tuesday morning thing. It was a palace maintenance thing. She continued to the next room. He continued down the corridor. This is the exchange that would haunt the subsequent inquiry more than almost any other element of the night, because it represents the clearest possible illustration of the principle that had protected Michael Fagan from the moment he went over the wall. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a man who was supposed to be there. And in the absence of any specific reason to disbelieve that appearance, a 22-year-old housemaid on the early shift did exactly what any reasonable person would do. She believed it. The footman enters here. His name was Paul Wybrew, and at approximately 6:20 in the morning, he was in the lower garden with the Queen's corgis, a duty that fell to him on certain rotations, and that he performed with the slightly resigned professionalism of a man who has made his peace with the portion of his career spent managing small dogs in the dark. He was not near the north wing. He was not near the staircase Michael Fagan had used. He was in the garden, and the corgis were in the garden, and the night was doing what the night does at 6:20 in July, which is becoming morning whether anyone is ready for it or not. He did not see Michael Fagan. Nobody positioned to do anything about Michael Fagan saw Michael Fagan. The corridor that led to the Queen's bedroom was on the second floor, east wing, set apart from the domestic working corridors by both geography and status. It was the kind of corridor that communicated its own importance without needing to say anything. The quality of the light fittings, the depth of the carpet, the particular silence that settles around rooms that matter. Michael Fagan tried the first door on the left. It was a sitting room. He went inside. On a shelf, and this detail would become one of the small, darkly comic fixed points of the story, the thing people repeat with a slightly helpless laugh was an ashtray. He knocked it off the shelf. It hit the floor and broke. He picked up a piece of it. He put it in his pocket. He looked at his hand, which was now bleeding more deliberately from the broken edge of the ashtray. He left the room. He opened the next door. Queen Elizabeth II woke up because there was a man in her room. Not because an alarm sounded, not because a guard appeared, not because any of the systems that had been built and paid for and trusted across decades of institutional security development activated in the way they had been designed to activate. Because there was a man in her room, and he pulled back the curtain, and the light came in, and she opened her eyes. He was sitting on the edge of her bed. He was bleeding. He was holding a piece of broken ashtray. What happened in the next few seconds is the part of this story that people find most difficult to locate inside their existing framework for how the world works. Because what happened was not panic, and it was not screaming, and it was not the activation of some hidden alarm or the appearance of a concealed weapon or any of the dramatic escalations that the scenario seems to demand. What happened was that Queen Elizabeth II looked at the man on the edge of her bed and began to talk to him. She asked him what he was doing there. He told her. He wanted to talk. He was having problems. His wife had left him. He was troubled in the way that people sometimes become troubled, not violently, not with any clear external logic, but deeply and completely. The kind of trouble that ends with a man sitting on a stranger's bed at 6:45 in the morning explaining himself to someone who had not asked. She listened. She kept him talking. She reached for the phone on the bedside table, the phone that connected directly to the police exchange, and it rang twice and was not answered. She tried again. No answer. She was later told that the officer on duty had stepped away from the monitoring station for a period that should not have coincided with a call from the royal bedchamber, but did. because things that should not coincide sometimes do, and the system had no redundancy for this particular gap. She put the phone down. She kept talking. She asked him if he would like some cigarettes. He said he would. She picked up the phone again, a different line, the internal line, and asked for someone to bring cigarettes to her room. It was 6:52 in the morning. This was not a normal request. It was the kind of request that communicates to anyone paying attention that something is not normal, because the Queen did not typically request cigarettes be delivered to her bedroom at 7 in the morning. The woman who received that call was Elizabeth Andrew. She was a housemaid. She had been on duty since 6. She was not a trained security operative. She was not armed. She had no protocol for what she was about to walk into, because no protocol existed for it, because the protocol assumed the situation could not exist. She picked up the cigarettes. She walked to the bedroom. She opened the door. She saw the Queen. She saw the man on the edge of the bed, the broken ashtray piece in his hand, the blood on his fingers, the absolute wrongness of the entire composition. She understood it in 1 second. And she did the thing that no training manual would ever have prescribed, that no security doctrine would ever have arrived at, that required not tactical expertise but a very specific kind of human intelligence, the kind that reads a room and finds the one action that extends time without escalating threat. She looked at Michael Fagan. "Can I get you a drink, love?" He said yes. She went to get it. In the corridor, she found a footman, not Paul Wybrew with the dogs, a different footman, James, who had come on duty at 6:30 and was 3 rooms away. She told him to get the police. She told him to get them immediately and quietly, and without coming back through the bedroom door. He went. She went back into the bedroom with the drink. Michael Fagan accepted it. He kept talking. 12 minutes after Elizabeth Andrew had walked through that door, 2 police officers arrived. They removed Michael Fagan from the room. He did not resist. He put down the piece of ashtray. He went with them. The Queen got up and got dressed and carried out her scheduled engagements for the day. That is not a detail added for dramatic compression. That is what happened. She had a schedule. She kept it. The incident was reported to the relevant authorities, and the relevant authorities began the process of understanding how a man in a checked shirt had walked through 3 centuries of security infrastructure and sat on the monarch's bed for 12 minutes, and the Queen went to her meetings. The kitchen knife was found later that day, in the pocket of a jacket Michael Fagan had left in the storage room on the 3rd floor, the room with the wine, the room he had visited on his way through the palace, the room he had left before turning toward the staircase, and the carpet that changed, and the corridor that led to the bedroom. He had not carried it with him into the room. He had not used it. He had, at some point in the night, put it down. Whether this was intentional or incidental, whether Michael Fagan arrived at Buckingham Palace with violence as a possibility and then set it aside, or whether the knife was never a weapon and always just an object he had in his jacket, the way people sometimes have objects in their jackets, this question was examined and argued and never definitively answered. The knife became the story because the story needed an object to organize itself around. A man sitting on a bed talking to a queen is an extraordinary thing, but it is an extraordinarily quiet thing, and quiet things are hard to hold in the mind. A knife is easier. A knife gives the story its shape, its threat, its near-miss quality. But the knife was in a different room. The knife never mattered. What mattered was a piece of broken ashtray, a phone that rang twice without answer, a woman who understood that the most dangerous thing she could do was move fast, and a question so disarming in its domesticity that it bought 12 minutes of safety for the most protected woman in the world. Can I get you a drink, love? Not tactical, not trained, not protocol. Human. The inquiry that followed the events of July 9th 1982, was thorough and damning, and produced a list of failures that read like a map of a building that had been designed to look impregnable while being, in several specific and critical ways, not. The unlocked window on the third floor was addressed. The sensor reset protocol was revised. The staffing coverage on the monitoring station was restructured so that the royal bedchamber line would never again ring into an empty room. The perimeter motion sensor system was upgraded. The internal patrol routes were redesigned to eliminate the gaps that a man moving at a normal walking pace could slip between. Michael Fagan was charged. The charge was not breaking and entering. Under the law as it stood in 1982, entering the palace was not in itself a criminal act, a legal quirk that caused its own small bureaucratic crisis. He was charged with theft for the wine he had consumed on his first visit. In June, he was eventually sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment rather than prison. He gave interviews in subsequent years. He spoke about the Queen with something that was not quite reverence and not quite familiarity, but sat in the uncomfortable space between them. The way people speak about an encounter that they know was wrong and cannot quite bring themselves to fully regret, because the person on the other side of it treated them, at the moment of maximum vulnerability, with something that felt like dignity. She talked to him. She kept him talking. She found the only exit that didn't require a weapon. The security apparatus of Buckingham Palace was rebuilt, reinforced, and fundamentally reconceived in the months that followed. The visible power of the sentries, the railings, the ceremonial weight of institutional protection, all of it remained. All of it was necessary. None of it was, by itself, sufficient. Because the system had been built for the threat that announced itself. And the threat that arrived wore a checked shirt and moved like a man going somewhere he had already been. And the wall he came over was 14 feet high, and the sentry whose arc of visibility covered that section was at the far end of his post, and the alarm fired and was reset by mistake, and the maid said good morning and kept walking, and the phone rang twice into an empty room. And a woman with a drinks tray and 12 minutes of steady nerve saved the morning. Not the knife. Never the knife. The knife was in a different room, sitting in the pocket of a jacket next to a half-empty bottle of wine, in a palace that had spent 300 years preparing for a threat that looked like a threat. The threat that arrived looked like a Tuesday, and the thing that stopped it looked like hospitality. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, the maid with the drinks tray, the Queen who kept talking, or the alarm that was reset by mistake. Which one stays with you? Because we are just getting started. The next story goes somewhere the cameras never reached, into a room where the protocol failed and the person improvised. And what happened next is the kind of thing that makes you rethink every assumption you have ever held about what security actually means. Stay with us.